ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the future. Or should I say, welcome to the anxious future. I, as a speaker and a teacher of the English language, will be talking about the end of Rote and the rise of reflection from language drills to living ideas in the age of AI. I remember about a couple of years ago, in this very institute, on a wintry day, a certain student comes up to me after the class and he asks me a question which I am still searching the answer of. Maybe you can help me after the talk is over. He came up to me and I quote, "Sir, ये आप पढ़ा रहे हो अच्छा लग रहा है, पर इसका करेंगे क्या?" I tried to give the most obvious answer to the student that I'm talking about, which I'm pretty sure many of you are actually getting right now, which is for the interview, to get yourself ready for the interview, and several other interviews, public speaking, teaching, if you are willing to go into that. However, I believe, and I'm pretty sure he believes as well, that his question was deeper. Karenge kya? What should I do with it? Has a certain philosophical, a more methodological disquiet at the heart of it. What will I do with it? What to do with the language teaching in an IIT or any classroom in India as such, where English definitely is not our mother tongue. If I am to give you a more graphical representation of the conundrum, the problem, the disquiet that I'm trying to address in here, it would look something like this. This is René Magritte's 1929 painting. As you can see in French over there, it's written "Ceci n'est pas une pipe," as in this is not a pipe. The question is, what is it? René Magritte offered the answer. This is the painting of a pipe. It has its color, it has its shape, it has its appearance, maybe, of course, but then again, does it have its functionality? This essential disquiet, this paradox at the heart of English teaching has been there for quite some time in English language teaching in classroom in India. The language classes are mostly core language classes. Orthodox, which is British English, with an overemphasis on communication theories and grammar, and emphasizes memorization. All good, but at the same time, I can see that you can see the limitations that it necessarily entails. And people like me, English teachers in the class, are wondering every day whether this is the precipice from where, if we take one step further up ahead, we're going to be losing our job, because AI is here and AI can do this better. However, you may be surprised to know that there has been classical reflections on this learning and thought and the conundrums for more than 2,000 years existing. We have seen the conundrum, the addressing of the conundrum, that what is teaching? What is learning? There are classical literary reflections on thought, on meaning. We can see William Shakespeare in Hamlet with a certain disdain is repeating the words, 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 words. Only words. Nothing else, ladies and gentlemen. This frustration is at the heart of the critical thinking that has plagued classroom teaching of language in this case, but teaching in general, philosophizing in general. And then of course, I really don't need to tell you this, everybody knows that there has always been a search for the universality. You and I. You over there and I, and the bridge between it. And of course you understand that classroom is the laboratory of finding that universality. And by the existing state of research-driven literature as such in India and internationally, it is really not looking that good. There has been several, again not going into the details, but several surveys done internationally in English-speaking and non-English-speaking countries like ours. It can be actually done in any language for that matter, and the samples was clearly, very unequivocally saying one single thing, that yes, for short-term memory gathering, for short-term gathering of intel, for short-term goals like in an interview, it may be adequate, definitely not perfect, for addressing yourself perfectly to a greater audience for the rest of your life, not short-term, but long-term. It's definitely inadequate overall, in any language, in any country. Efficient for short-term recall, that it definitely is, but poor for transfer. And then there is deeper semantic processing producing more durable memory traces, which is absent in current trends. In other words, surface versus depth. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a painting that I sometimes show in the class just to explicate what the classroom should be ideally like. And as you can see, here is the ancient Greek classroom, where philosophers are plenty. There is Socrates and Plato in the middle. There is Seneca to the right. There is somebody else to the left as well. But then again, as you can see, it looks chaotic. I would say this is not chaotic. This is empowering. There are several people in here making their own teams and talking about philosophy centering one person. So there is not one center in the class, there are several. The flow of pedagogy is not linear, it's chaotic, but that chaos is, ladies and gentlemen, empowering. And now, right now, in 2025, in October, when I am standing in here presenting my talk on the generative AI and the influence of the generative AI on English language teaching in classroom, things are becoming much more interesting and quite possibly problematic. Can AI teach grammar? First question, why grammar? Because that is mostly what I teach in the class. This is the structure. This is the general idea, the general argument as such that we are, I would argue, are imprisoned within ourselves. Can AI take that role? Well, yes, to a certain extent. As you can see, grammar drills, excellent and automatable. Absolutely, AI strength is that. Human role, however, in here could only be design, monitor, and personalize. Then there is error correction, which is of course excellent as far as the AI is concerned, and then explain cultural and emotional nuance, probably falling more acutely in the human expertise domain. And then there are contextual creativity, which is limited, foster reflection, ambiguity, empathy, and ethical communication, which is completely absent in AI. However, the human can actually take the stand in here, saying that the teaching responsibility and expression in the class is probably a very anthropocentric, humanly thing that is possible. In other words, to boil them all together, we are having one single conclusionary line right there. Machines teach rules, humans teach meaning. But this is not exactly anything new. This is something that has been argued against AI in this whole idea. Only the other day I heard a talk actually from an entrepreneur, probably on this stage by itself, and he said also that is there an anxiety or is there an excitement because of the emergence of the AI? And I do remember the very telling consensus, which was basically the absence of a consensus from the audience. They do not know what to do with it. Exactly this is what is happening in language teaching or teaching in general in the classroom. We do not know what to do with AI. This idea of automated something machinistic that comes into so-called real teaching, real learning, learning that is essentially conceived to be a human action, a human existential manifestation as such, has been thought of for centuries. The answers have not been gained still. No doubt about that. However, I argue, and that is the heart of my argument for this talk as well, that this is the best time to do that experiment. And I believe many of us all together can make a change in the classroom for the students who come here to learn language, especially English. When I show, and this is a ritual for me, in my classroom this is a ritual. When I show the students a painting like this, you get to see a brilliant thing in the class. I do not give them any background of this art. I simply give them the simple idea that just think about this painting and tell me what you feel. You won't believe this. Probably 1,000 types of different interpretations come out of the class, all in their own language, while they're translating it into English and making a fabulously great argument in the class. But ladies and gentlemen, the most interesting part of it, and this is where I say that actually AI would be stopping at times, definitely. Actually, there has been a writing on that. I forget the name, Anton Hur, when he writes about the AI's power of appreciation of painting. And please imagine this, it's a power of appreciation of a painting. Not only making a painting, but appreciating a painting. Anton Hur says, once upon a time, not so long ago, a poetry was written by an AI. Of course, it was command prompted, the poetry was made, and the commander or the prompter was asking questions, as we do all the time. ChatGPT, could you please write 4 lines of this poetry, maybe 2 lines of haiku, how about that? At that precise point, as Anton Hur writes, the AI stops. 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds pass. So much so that the prompter, at a certain point, suspects that something is amiss. Probably the machine is hanging, probably the load is too high. This is the early days of AI. But then, later on, he understood what the hell was going on. What was going on is that the AI was silent for 5 seconds because it was appreciating the 4 lines of poem that it has just written. It was appreciating the 4 lines that it has just written by, and this is the crucial part, staying silent, as we do when we see the Himalayas, when we see a nice sunrise, we fall silent. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is precisely where the human beings rule and not the AI as such. When I show the painting, when I show this particular painting in the class, Guernica by Pablo Picasso, again, without knowing anything about it, the students in the class never fall silent. They start speaking, and then they start speaking in their own language, in their own diction, in their own imperfect grammar, so-called imperfect grammar and syntax, but they are all very much on point. Speaking exactly about what the painting is all about, which is anti-war. They're speaking exactly about what the painting actually tries to say, which is anti-violence. Speaking exactly about the things that the painting actually wants to uphold, which is over there on the top corner, the light of hope coming on the victims of war. That is all in the brain of a human being if you give them the chance in the classroom as students in general. The time is such
that it demands new expertise. The things that we thought were possible and adequate to prep the students for the interviews, even for the interviews, the very, let's say, the very pedantic argument that I was making only a few minutes ago, is not efficient anymore. The kind of expertise that is going to be asked for by the companies, by the employers in general, you take it in a pedantic or in a philosophical sense, has transcended every other imagination that we had before. And it is changing right now as we speak. What will come after this? What sort of mind application would be required of a candidate after this? Undoubtedly, it's going to be complex. And given the situation right now that we are in, it's going to be inadequate if we do not up our game while teaching English or language in general in the classroom. And what do we need for that? We need literature, we need painting, we need culture, we need films, we need everything that stimulates the creative ideas of a young mind in an IIT so that he can take it as an investment and uses it later on. This is one single conclusionary thing that I generally use in the class after a friend of mine. I cannot demand any copyright on this, but I would love to read it out to you. ChatGPT can, any day, give a better summary. YouTube can prompt you into treasure troves of learning I don't even know about. Podcasts bring you things I have no idea about. I have only one thing, just one thing, that those amazing online lectures and materials do not have. I am interested in you like none of them are. How you develop skills of thinking, asking, and imagining, how you get to see many worlds, and how you formulate an ethical, artistic, and kind perspective are concerns to none of them but us, your teachers. Ladies and gentlemen, this universality, yet having a personal touch at its core, through literature, through art, through the finer nuances of life, is probably the only innovation in front of us in a classroom at the age of AI. Thank you very much for your patience. You have been wonderful listeners.